A very good evening to one all present over here. The migrant crisis through a law perspective. Other than various acts and provisions which is providing, we need to understand how the crisis is going to go in the future and how the government has been responding to it. So for that, we have two distinguished panelists with us, Professor Surendra Kumar and Professor Dr. Banerjee Chaka. So I would like to introduce both of them first, and then would like to mention a set of questions for which by which the panelists would be would be able to address to a certain set of questions by which they will be directing the discussion towards a certain tangent will be helpful for our viewers in the future. So Professor Dr. Banerjee Chaka graduated from Andhra University with BAL and LLB degrees. He holds an LLM degree from the School of Oriental African Studies, SOAS London, and has MPhil and PhD degrees in the international law from Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi, India. He completed his postgraduate certificate course in learning, teaching and research in higher education and postgraduate diploma in French language, literature and culture from the National University of Ireland, Galway, Republic of Ireland. He has also obtained a PG diploma in industrial relations, personal management, and labor welfare. Welcome, sir. I'll also introduce Professor Surendra Kumar. Professor Surendra Kumar is a lecturer at Jindal Global Law School. He has completed his Masters of Law from SOAS University of London as a Chevening Scholar, specializing in international law and human rights. He graduated from Dr. Ram Manohar Lohia National Law University, Lucknow in 2013 with this. So the questions are as follows. What do you think about the present migrant crisis and the response of the government? Do you see provisions made by the government for the poor and the vulnerable as a social moral responsibility or a constitutional duty? The second question is, there have been a lot of reluctance on the behalf of the Supreme Court to issue statements regarding the migrant crisis. Do you see this as a growing tendency among the population who look up to the Supreme Court as a prime entity for judicial intervention, or do you think the Supreme Court has a key role to play in tackling these types of crises? The third question would be, with recent updates of suspension of labor laws by different states, do you see this as a significant measure in order to recover businesses hit from the pandemic? And I think this question, any of the questions, Professor Surendra can also take them up. And another question, sir, would be wonderful how are the International Labour Organization defining and directing measures for labor classes around the world during the pandemic? So these are some of the questions. You can take your time and answer all of them according to your convenience. So I'll hand over the floor to you, sir.
Okay, very good. Now, thank you very much to both of you and good evening. And it's wonderful to be part of this prestigious Jindal Law University, Jindal Global University, the talk on public law and economics. In fact, the three questions which have been answered is very pertinent for this particular moment of time. And I will go in sequence. The first question first, so that our viewers and audience will have little clarity about the legal system in this country, what we have been following. So if you look at that, the entire saga of issues which have been undergoing, beginning of March 22nd and 23rd, the government of India has issued a notification, maybe of overnight lockdown, giving only 4 hours to the public to be locked themselves in and not to come out by invoking Disaster Management Act of 2005. Now, I will not look into the issues relating to our legality of that particular act or the order, because since Prime Minister of India is the chairperson of this particular Disaster Management Authority, National Disaster Management Authority, he has a prerogative to declare in any kind of man-made disasters or natural disasters. Now, it's very interesting to see that this particular disaster, which evoked a mixed response from the different people. And also, if you look at that, 22nd and subsequently on 25th and 28th, these are 3 orders given by the Government of India. Is very interesting to see. They are available online for our viewers and the students to get to know and refer them. If you look at that in the 25th, what the government has issued, they are going for nationwide lockdown in order to contain the pandemic, which is creating havoc on the human lives in the country as well as in the world. And the second thing, in the same order, the Prime Minister of India has requested people to maintain the physical distance, stay at homes, and not to come out, and also to keep themselves hygiene and etc. But this order did not talk about the basic rights which are there under the human rights law and the Indian Constitution. And subsequently, we have another order given by the Prime Minister on 28th of March, which clearly says that he is requesting all the industrial establishments as well as private organizations not to stop the salaries because the daily wage laborers, the private employers are not working because of the lockdown. But subsequently, that particular order was challenged by the organizations and their associations. And Supreme Court has accepted that application. And then they subsequently started looking into that legality and how they are going to do it. Now, let me go back to the lockdown, and it is the constitutionality of invoking lockdown under the Disaster Management Act. Certainly, Disaster Management Act was not ensued this kind of pandemic, what we have been experiencing since the last 3 months. The National Disaster Management Act, which we have, it is only suited for the purpose of addressing the problems relating to cyclones, hurricanes, typhoons, earthquake, and other related disasters, but not the health disaster which we are experiencing. If you look at the provisions of Disaster Management Act, nowhere it talks about that health emergency and a subsequent lockdown or its related actions taken by the Government of India. So this is a very conspicuous absence. But as I said, I'm not going to talk about the legality of that particular act as well as the orders issued by the Government of India on 24th night, March 24th night. Let us come back to the subsequent issues. The first issue was the rights of the people which were guaranteed under the Indian Constitution, Article 21, Article 19, and also the other subsequent articles, right to life with dignity, right to have a free environment, and the right to have a social security. And now I'm specifically mentioning the right to have a social security. Though it is explicitly not mentioned under the Indian Constitution, but you can look at it, the international obligations which have been given by the ILO conventions which have been passed with regard to the workers of the world, including India. If I specifically refer 1945, the convention with regard to the social security adopted by the International Labour Organization, it is one of the classic examples saying that every individual, those who are associated with either organized or unorganized sector, they must have social security. It is a right of the people. If you look at that particular ILO legislation in the context of Universal Declaration of Human Rights, Article 25 and 24, which clearly says that right to have a social security is a fundamental right. It's a non-derogable human right. And subsequently, what we adopted, International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, which clearly stated, particularly the enforcement of the economic, social, and cultural rights, which is specifically talking about ensuring the guarantees to the basic fundamental rights of the people, including the social security. In our Indian Constitution, if you look at it, the enforceable part of fundamental rights, which are there under the Part 3, which is conspicuously absent with regard to the social security is concerned. But whereas, if you look at the Part 4 of the Indian Constitution, which is specifically mentioned that though they are not enforceable by the court of law, but they made it as a mandatory for the governments. For daily governance, they must adhere to the provisions which have been mentioned under the Part 4 of the Indian Constitution, that is Directive Principles of the State Policy. If you look at that, the relevant articles in this particular Part 4, which clearly provides a framework for the purpose of securing guarantee to the life and social security, which intertwined with an Article 21 of the Indian Constitution. So these two articles we have to read together. Article 21 and Article 39, 40 and 41 of the Indian Constitution, which is bedrock of the entire India's workforce, which not been addressed by the either state and the judiciary. Somehow I can say that this time judiciary has conveniently ignored the fate of the people, those who are undergoing in this particular context of COVID-19 and coronavirus, where the courts are supposed to play a role in the context of enforcing and ensuring the rights of the individuals, which the courts have kept themselves aloof from the reality. That's the first point. The second point, when the Prime Minister declared with a 4 hours notice the lockdown, we did not talk about the food security of the people. If you look at that, the Food Security Act of 2013, which passed by the Indian government, which ensures that food security. And this particular act did not made in isolation, and they made that particular act in consonance with the obligations of the Article 21 and also obligations of rights which are enshrined under the Part 4 of the Indian Constitution. Now, let us look at that, the issue which we are discussing about the food security, social security, and dignity of the people. Why I am referring all this, particularly with regard to the after lockdown, after declaration of the lockdown, and all the laborers, those are working in organized and unorganized sector, have left with no option but to start the mass exodus. And it is considered as one of the greatest humanitarian disasters of modern times. If you look at that, after the lockdown, the laborers, all the newspapers, they say that 40 million of unorganized laborers have started because they don't have any option. Their employers did not pay the salaries and they were forced to starve, and state governments did not bother to provide basic facilities to sustain a day's basic life with dignity, which was compromised in this context. And with that, these people have started hitting the roads, and it is what I'm saying, that in the modern time, it is one of the greatest human disaster. Now, what happened? It did not stop there. It also expanded, the ill treatment of the people. If you look at that, our Indian Constitution, every individual will have a right to life with dignity. And also, we have specific international instruments such as ICCPR and ICSCR. And these particular legislations, which clearly mentions that an obligations to the every signatory state. When the signatory states are not following these obligations, where people have to go. And I will narrate two issues. when the people in north of India, particularly from Uttar Pradesh and Delhi, they started going back to their homes, when they reached bus stands, railway stations, and the security authorities, police personnel were treated them with so much of indignity. What is that indignity? And they sprayed chemical on them, treating them as if they are insects and as if they are not even worth of a human being. I am not undermining the state efforts, but we know how this coronavirus has come to this country. Coronavirus has come to this country through various means, but not from this marginalized communities of the people what we have been seeing. But these people have meted the most inhuman, degrading treatment within the hands of the public authorities. That also did not evoke the response of the Supreme Court. If I recall, there are almost 15 public interest litigations have been filed in the Supreme Court, but unfortunately, the Supreme Court did not find the time to look into this human catastrophe and also the knocking hands of people through the public interest litigation. So what I say that it is a systematic government failure, as well as the courts have kept already it's a blindfolded eyes, but the ears are also closed to listen this kind of human catastrophe. Now, I would like to answer the second question, what you have asked, whether people are expecting the Supreme Court has to intervene in this kind of situation. Of course, let me tell you very brief analysis the saga of the Supreme Court. As a student of law, we all knew that Supreme Court was considered as a messiah of marginalized people. If you look at that Article 32 and the Constitutional Assembly debate, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar has already said that if at all there is one article within the Constitution which is very useful, that is Article 32. If you remove Article 32, there is nothing in the Indian Constitution. That is what exactly is said during the time of presenting Article 32 in the Constitutional Assembly. But now what happens to Article 32? Though we have number of legislation to talk about the access to justice, and we are also hailing that an Indian Supreme Court has given a path-breaking judgments by judicial activism. What happened to the judicial activism today? And also look at it now. Even people, whatever they have reposed their faith on the Supreme Court was not meted to the people, and they got cold response from the Supreme Court. If you further look at that now, is it the duty of the Supreme Court or it's a duty of the central government? Of course, both the judiciary and executive, two wings have to respond to the situation, which is the greatest humanitarian crisis which we are facing in this country. Now let us go back. The issue of first public interest litigation and Supreme Court involvement, and subsequently the Supreme Court taking a suo motu action on the migration crisis. The first thing, if you look at that, last 1995 onwards, if you look at that, the Supreme Court and its judgments, whatever the political systems and whatever the means of collegium system made all the high courts have become redundant to respond to the humanitarian crisis, and then all the humanitarian crisis and human rights violations have been solely directed towards the Supreme Court. And now Supreme Court has metamorphosed as a messiah of marginalized people and protection of the rights. But now, is it good to do that? I don't know. Morally, if we are speaking good or bad, I do not want to qualify it. But legally speaking, it is the duty, because we are talking about that constitutional obligations to the Supreme Court for the purpose of providing and ensuring the justice to the people, where people are failed to have basic necessities because of the pandemic. Now, within this subparagraph, if I call the second point, we have to critically examine the Supreme Court now and their judgments. If you look at that in the Supreme Court response, it is a very lukewarm, and they did not have the time. They said that only very a calculative statement made by the judges of the Supreme Court. It gives really heart-wrenching feeling, because the Supreme Court honorable judges have mentioned that when these migrant workers have been provided food in their facilities where they are living, what is the necessity for them to start walking on the roads? This is exactly the question posed by the Supreme Court judges in this particular context. So that means in this episode, if you look at that, people, those who belong to that marginalized communities, because I'm including that marginalized community, I will come back, maybe my friend Surinder can substantiate that point as well. But if you look at that, most of the migrant workers belong to the economically deprived sections, as well as caste-wise, they are also marginalized in this country. So that is why what I feel that in this society, they have meted lukewarm response, and their lives and rights have been compromised by both the legislative, judiciary, and executive in the context of COVID-19. Now, coming to your subsequent questions. If you are talking about the point number 1 on the third question, the labor laws, the labor crisis, and international obligations. As I illustrated, the ILO has given a plethora of directions to the state parties for the protection of the labor rights. But today, what is the fate of the labor rights in India? After the economic liberalization, most of the labor rights have been violated, and our labor law legislations are made redundant. Now, the 2019 Wage Code Bill, which is still pending with the Parliament, if you look at that, now all the basic social security measures, as well as all the facilities which are provided, enjoyed by the working class of this country in the past 70 years have been compromised by the Wage Code Bill. And subsequently, even the Supreme Court has said, if the companies, private establishments, or organizations, or multinational companies, if they are not going to pay the due salaries to the employees, as well as these working class people, and they are not going to take any kind of case on it. So that means all these legislations have been compromised with the advent of the new code bill, as well as the new legislation. I will also refer on one particular legislation, that is safety maternity benefit bills, which is pending in the Supreme Court in 2020, which came for the discussion, and which clearly say that they might give the maternity benefit relief to the women employees, but with regard to the children, there is no mention on that. But with regard to the unorganized sector and their role, with regard to the enforcing and obligating towards this particular bill, and the bill doesn't talk about that. Now, what I would like to conclude by saying that COVID has become an excuse to compromise the labor relations and the labor welfare measures, which we have been following under the Constitution and under the international obligations, which we have been following. So it is one of the greatest challenges today for the enforcement of the rights of the labor in general and migrant labor in particular. And the last point, which I just want to say and sum it up, if you look at that United Nations Convention relating to migrant workers, it only talks about the international migrants, but it doesn't talk about the migrant labor within the country. But if you take the spirit of that particular international legislation, it is nothing but what we have obligations under the ICCPR, ICSCR, and ILO legislations with regard to the social security. And all these international legislations talks about that social security as a basic fundamental right. But now you could see that we are compromising and going away from the ensuring that social security rights, and we are only going towards the populism. Since I use the word called populism, and I'll just explain in a minute and then I will stop it here. The populism is now growing. In the growing populism, people are only got used to the soaps as well as the meager incentives given by the state, but they are compromising on the basic principles of the rule of law, including enforcement of the basic fundamental rights. With this, I'll stop it here. If you have any further questions, I'm happy to answer. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir. Those were wonderful insights. Now I would like to call Professor Surendra into the discussion and mention the few questions which we have for him. So the few of them are as follows. With recent updates of suspension of labor laws by different states, do you see this as a significant measure in order to recover businesses hit from the pandemic? This is a similar question which Dr. Banerjee also talked about. So it will be wonderful to also have your insights on this. Another one is, how is India doing in terms of the maternity benefit acts for pregnant women in comparison to other countries in the international community? And a third question would be regarding the evolution of the Arogya Setu app, which has evolved from voluntary to voluntary mandatory to effectively mandatory. Do you really think there should be an Arogya Setu law? Kindly throw some light on the legal flaws and the application it constitutes. So I'll hand over the floor, and any other questions you have from the ones which Professor Banerjee also mentioned, then you can obviously jump onto them. Yeah, thank you. So you're muted, sir.
Yeah, just put in the questions here. It will be easier for me to continue. Just the 4 questions that you have asked. But before I do, thank you so much, Srijit, and thank you so much, Professor Banerjee, for such a lovely talk. Okay, so the first question is about the suspension of the labor laws. Okay, so we have to look it through the 2 lenses. One is through the constitutional lens, one is through the international law lens. Okay, so in Aadhaar, or rather right to privacy judgment, Justice Chandrachud has really explained in, I would say, the best fashion possible, the relationship of constitutional law and international law, and he has opined that they actually have to be read complementarily and not totally against each other. They have to be construed harmoniously, much like fundamental rights and new directive principles state policy, part 3 and part 4. But also you have to give effect. You're legally bound. There is an obligation upon you to do that. Why am I talking that? Because again, if you read what exactly ILO has been putting across, even on the website, and they are really concerned. So ILO is one of the oldest organizations, actually predates the United Nations. So when you had ILO, India actually was involved, and we have seen, as Professor Banerjee has mentioned, there is a concerted effort to chip it bit by bit, the labor code and the labor protection. And if you have to understand, I mean, the whole power relation, the way Marxian theory puts it, the proletariat and the bourgeois. So this rise of inequality, which Thomas Piketty talks about, that has led to concentration of wealth in very few people. And that is because if you see through, I mean, EPW has published many articles on this, the wage has actually not gone up, while the income, or rather the turnover of the companies has. That is one. So there is no trickle down effect of, I would say, your wages or labor. That is one. Secondly, you have to understand, in India, at least when we talk about wages, and especially for contractual daily wages, or rather people who are not on informal employment, it is seen more as a charity, rather a largest rather than a right. So I mean, I can give an example from my own. When I started out as an academician, I mean, most of the teachers, they start out on contract, and then basically there was some issue while I was leaving, and then they basically sent me 1 day recovery of salary. And I actually told, you can't actually do that, because A, you really cannot divide it per day. Secondly, it is much beyond the threshold of what actually government is prescribed per day. So then that is when I actually came to know about what you call the wage code and the labor and everything else. And I'm basically saying the harassment is all across. This is me being actually being questioned because I was not there 1 day, and they wanted the salary to be given. I mean, we settled it down finally, but the very idea was that a this attitudinal change is very important. Now, if I come down to the question of labor law and suspension, now that specifically hits out against part 20, article 23 and 24 of the Indian Constitution, which is basically right against exploitation. Now 24 is very clear, it applies to children. So it is very unfortunate that we have just prohibition of children below the age of 14 in hazardous. So above the age of 14, they obviously can work, but as we have seen all across, it is obviously not followed very well. I mean, Kailash Satyarthi's work is a testament to that. But what I'm very concerned about is how Supreme Court has approached the payment of wages. Okay, so there are two things which has happened. So the order of this one, the government passed an order, obviously, as Professor Banerjee has discussed, on 24th, right? But what happens is what happens is this, that you also had an order on the fact that you will be paying salary to everyone. Basically, it was for 50 days around, because this order was of 29th March. The Home Secretary, acting as the chairperson of the National Executive Committee under the Disaster Management Act, he issued an order which says basically all the employers, be it industry or in shops or and commercial establishments, shall make payment of wages of their workers at their place at workplaces on due date without any deduction for the period that establishment are under closure during the lockdown. So this obviously was challenged in the Supreme Court by Ludhiana Hand Tools Association versus Union of India. So one thing is that the primary argument which the employers made was that, I mean, NDMA actually cannot be utilized to give a carte blanche, straight away power to the central government to actually compel the payment of wages to the workers. And secondly, I mean, this is a very technical, very I would say redundant argument which was also made, was that the constitution obviously applies only to the governmental establishment. It can argue the government establishment or substantially financed, basically whatever falls under state, as per article 12, can be compelled, but not private entities. So can the private entities also be compelled to pay for lockdown again? So the first question is, I mean, that is what was dealt by Supreme Court. I mean, they did not. I mean, if you read Gautam Bhatia's brilliant work on his website, they actually have never really ruled upon the constitutionality of the lockdown in the first place. The order I'm talking about is of June 12th. So they have never really ruled upon the constitutionality. They have really never ruled upon whether or not it is the competence of the central government to actually do that. And he has obviously written about the fact that we are actually in a state of executive emergency, an undeclared emergency. Why? Because obviously the parliament has been signed in, adjourned. So there is no parliamentary oversight. Everything is basically flowing from NDMA for the central government and Epidemic Diseases Act for the state government. And the kind of executive orders and decrees that have been passed actually is basically all blank, in the sense they are all encompassing. There is absolutely no sense of coherence, proportionality, legality, or the sense that if it is actually needed what they are doing. So when we actually have, I mean, there is no mention of I mean, it has entered a common parlance lockdown, but has lockdown ever been defined in the first place? Secondly, the prohibition of movement of people all across, that was through the police, coercive action, and not with anything else. So that has never actually been discussed in the first place. So why is all this relevant is because your payment of wages was not to be, basically it was a social security that was given, and we all know that it was not given in the first place. So the issue which obviously was on the other side from the workers is that obviously they have not been paid for 50 days. And giving a personal example out here again, we had made, I mean, we had decided, at least we at Jindal had decided that whoever we hired as domestic helps and everyone, we will be paying come what may, because as long as there is steady income flow, people really depend from paycheck to paycheck. So it is, they survive in installments every month. So when you stop the wages, because the factory is not working, it's not that they have refused to work, it's because of the governmental policy. So again, the other argument was it is government which has done this, why they do not pay from PM CARES fund or National Relief Fund. I mean, some have raised, I mean, very few of the establishment raised this issue that they are incapable to pay. So what we see here is an arrogance, a total asympathetic attitude that come what may, because you're not working, we are not going to pay. So they argue basically that no work means no pay. But if you read properly, or rather we read conjunctively as it is supposed to, Article 23 read with Article 19, and then your DPSP, specifically Article 41 and 39, humane work conditions, maternity benefit, which obviously has been answered, but I'll add one more point to that. So this whole mesh of constitutional provisions basically guarantee that people have to be paid so that they can do a subsistence which is to the dignity as being human being. I mean, Supreme Court has obviously paid this homely to that, that life is more than a mere animal existence. But when it actually came to that, Supreme Court's Chief Justice Bobde passed very unsympathetic comment saying, if they're getting food, why do they need wages? So that shows itself how distant, or how distant the Supreme Court is far away from understanding the plight of your migrant laborers. Now, Professor Anuj Bhuwania of Jindal has also written how, when you read through the suo motu migrant labor crisis which the Supreme Court has taken, there is actually no law which they cite, and that exactly is also a problem with the 28-page order which they passed. There is absolutely no discussion on law there. So what effectively they have done is they overruled the dicta, or rather the direction of the central government passed in the NDMA. And then they basically said it is upon the employee and the employer to bargain, and they will hear the matter at the end of July. Now, one thing which I know from my experience is employer and employee are in a very different power structure. Collective bargaining was a possibility, but it is a very long distance dream. I mean, we have seen how Uber, Ola, Swiggy, Zomato, how all these platform gig economy laborers, protest happen, and what comes out of it every time. So basically transposing that experience here is, it is basically asking, I mean, it is basically relying on negotiation between very two unequal parties, and that really cannot happen. I mean, you can have a contract between two equal parties, but the very fact that as an employer and as an employee, and that is something which Marx highlighted a long time back, was that the power structures are such that it is always skewed in favor of the employer. So when we say that there's suspension of labor laws, uh, you have basically the state government going totally against the what you call the constitution. That is one. It is not a reform, it is a repression, as Aruna Roy puts it. Secondly, such thing which was, again, I mean, very curiously done by BJP government all across, uh, have to be ratified by the president. And thirdly, they really never gave a reason why is it required in the first place. Why labor laws have to be suspended? Why not you have something alternative? Why not hire more people? Why not the state government or other central government give assistance to these people? Or why do you not? I mean, you have ruled that so many times in the jurisprudence. I mean, I can give you cases after cases that financial incapacity is never a reason to fulfill an obligation. So unless you prove, or rather these people should be called to account, the establishment which are saying that we cannot pay. I mean, I'm not saying they are not hit. Everyone agrees. I mean, people have been hit all across, left, right, and center. I mean, there was a report that 30% of the urban population will run out of the saving by this month end, or rather than next month. So you are really looking at very grim prospect. I'm saying if the permanent urban population, which is well cushioned in terms of social security, finances, and saving, is going through harrowing times, so what do you think happens to the laborers? So as Professor Banerjee says, I think it is very unequal and unfair. And this whole suspension of laws, labor laws itself, is totally unconstitutional. Um, and it basically misses the point. I mean, the businesses should recover. I agree, economy works, but you have to. I mean, that is what Amartya Sen has been talking about. What does economic growth and development mean, and whom does it mean for? It is for the human development. So unless you have human development in the first place, it is absolutely preposterous to do something like that. And I mean, obviously, it is. I mean, the kind of backlash they face. I mean, it has been put in cold storage, and there was lovely study which was published in Indian Express, wherein they talked about how we 8 hours per day. So it has a colonial origin, and that is how it has stuck across. So that is one. So if so, just to summarize, basically, come what may, you really cannot have suspension in the first place because that is unconstitutional. That will be nothing more than force, which the it is being legitimized by the state. Uh, Secondly, and when I say forced labor, you have to understand in constitutional terms. There's a very lovely case called PUDR versus Union of India, People Union of Civil Liberties, Democratic Rights. That is Asiad Games 1983 judgment, wherein they talked about how forced labor does not only mean physical or undue influence, it can also mean the compunctions or the circumstances which force you to take up any job, where you are not actually in place to negotiate and bargain. And that is what the has been extracted by what we call the state government here. You are basically legitimizing and totally ripping 23 of the constitution. So that is one. uh, Secondly, benefit, yes, as Professor Banerjee already mentioned. I mean, there is this reluctance, and this is seen as irritant, that maternity benefit, you're paying someone not to work, in the sense that men don't get pregnant, women do. So again, Article 15 kicks in here, discrimination on the basis of sex. So the idea is that obviously you'll have to pay. I mean, you cannot. So the classification 14 and 15, you cannot have such a classification wherein you distinguish people on the basis of sex. Here, that is what happens because of one biological factor. They get pregnant, and you have to look after in labor law. So there is this lovely case which is almost never mentioned or brought up, is the case of just a minute, is the case of MCD muster roll. So this is the case of MCD's Municipal Corporation Delhi. Muster roll is obviously you have Municipal Corporation Delhi and female workers muster roll is this case wherein the 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 contractual employers who were hired were had filed a case that irrespective of your nature of work, you are required to be given maternity benefit. So now that forms part of your human conditions to work, and then that is also given in your fundamental, rather your DPSP. So in your DPSP, it is specifically mentioned that you have to give women your you have to give women wherever it is you have to give leave to women whenever they are going through they are pregnant basically. So after that, just to mention, after that, so you had amended the Maternity Benefit Act of 2017. It basically says that it you have to protect, I mean, basically the question was whether the Maternity Benefit Act of 1961 applies to women, and the court categorically answered yes, it does. The division bench answered is yes, it does. And they went on to say basically that because India is party to Convention on Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination against Women, that has to be given effect in India, and hence your Maternity Benefit Act will apply to everyone. Now, what has changed in the meantime? So since this general election in 2017, the BJP government passed the Maternity Benefit Amendment Act. So it amended the Maternity Benefit Act of 1961, saying that the women's employment and children well-being during maternity with paid absence and related benefits. The amendment extends the maternity leave for women employees with less than 2 surviving children from 12 weeks to 26 weeks. And this was actually brought in because you had the Maternity Protection Convention number 183 of ILO. So it allowed that you had 14 weeks of maternity benefit surely. And WHO, which is the World Health Organization, recommended that children should be breastfed by mothers at least till 24 weeks for healthy development of the children. Now, then there was a clarification issued by your Ministry of Labor and Employment saying that maternity benefit of the amended act is available to everyone, to the unorganized sector, irrespective of the capacity in which they are employed. So the basic idea is, doesn't matter where you work, doesn't matter in what capacity you work, you have to give maternity benefit. So again, this happened, and this is what I'm illustrating the attitude of some of the employers, and this anecdote basically showed me, and that is why I got interested in studying this area. So while I was working again in that institute, that academic institute, there was a contractual person who was hired. So basically, whenever you are hired as an assistant professor, you normally are on probation or on contract for 1 to 2 years. So during that time, obviously, she was pregnant, and the question cropped up whether or not, as a person on contract, will you be allowed to, or rather, can you take maternity leave in the first place? So I actually went through the whole act and everything. So what it says is basically you should have worked for minimum 6 months. That's it, nothing more. 6 months to, I mean, there is a specific period before that maternity benefit kicks in, but irrespective of your capacity, you are allowed. Doesn't matter. So this invention of that only permanent women employees are allowed and not contractual or ad hoc or any of this artificial categories which people keep on telling is absolutely unconstitutional in that sense, because it runs contrary to the whole statute which is there and the Supreme Court judgment. Now, I mean, today I was reading And I have to give credit to Jindal students there where it is due. Some of the students, while the university was being established and run, they organized and they campaigned for the workers out here, and the outsourcing. So the students in New Delhi are protesting against laying off workers right now, and they have been doing incredible work. So you see this kind of sensitivity coming from the most unexpected quarters of students. So uh, when you see at least from other communities, I think Professor Banerjee can shed some light on that also if he is willing. But in other countries, this so much of distinction, and there is no so much of irritant or rather resistance from the employers when it comes to maternity benefit. They straight away give it, and they pay for everything. I mean, they hire people to cover. So you have specific jobs being taken out for maternity benefit cover. So for 1 year, 1.5 years, that is very easily discernible out there. I mean, this job is just because some person is on maternity benefit. I mean, I have never seen such job post, at least in India. So that being said, Professor Banerjee, do you want to add something before I move on to the third one, which is totally unrelated to the first two questions?
Yes, yeah, Surendra. I just want to know, focus on two issues which you have highlighted. The one thing which is with regard to the conditions of the labor in the COVID situation, and response from the judiciary as well as and the policy makers. And now it comes to my mind that the first question, recently the government of India has declared Atmanirbhar Bharat. It's one of the program initiated in order to strengthen the economic health of the country. And out of which, if you look at it, how much it is going to help the people. So I'm not much worried about the policy and the economic health of the country, but rather I am very much worried and look at it, the health of the workers and the kind of treatment they are meted out. And now how this particular COVID has become a tool for the governments to flout the constitutional obligations. If you look at it, as you mentioned, very rightly, with regard to inequality is growing. And at the same time, now the poverty and hunger, it's looming on India's people. So if you look at that, three aspects, like one, boosting of the economy and health of the economy of the country in the name of Atmanirbhar Bharat, but we have not taken the same kind of measures which help and boost the people of this country, particularly the workers. And now Supreme Courts and High Courts as well as the governments are now, rather they are showing some kind of cold response and inertia towards enforcing the rights of the people. So let us look at that. The current trend continues for over a period of another 6 months. That is what the health experts, which they are now emphasizing. If the same kind of situation continues, now the repressive measures of the organizations are going to grow, and which is going to get compromised all the basic fundamental rights of the people. Now it is the right time for the legal fraternity as well as the Supreme Courts and High Courts must be cautious to look at it, the human side of the story of this COVID-19. As I said, the repressive measures are on steep growth in the name of health of the economy. There is a compromising labor welfare policies. They are compromising and increasing the working hours of the employers. And also all the benefits which have been the fruits of the constitutional mandate and the labor movements have been totally compromised. That's the first point which I want to focus. The second point which I would like to further bring it to your kind attention is that the growing unrest among the private organizations and corporations, because they are saying that due to the 2 months of the lockdown or 60 days of the lockdown, they are showing that they have not reaped the benefits, and now they are asking for the state to give the freedom to increase the charges, to reduce the wages. And already the government of India has declared just a week ago that central government will not pay to their employees the due increments, which is supposed to be given in the month of July. And now if you look at that, central government employees now they're supposed to get the hike of the dearness allowance, and there's another social security measures, which I'm talking about organized sector. If the organized sector is so affected by this government policies in the COVID-19, then what happens to the unorganized sector and the marginalized people, such as migrant labor? That's a big question which we need to ponder. Now, as we just debated, we discussed, currently the most of the labor laws are not applicable to this migrant laborers and laborers those who are associated with the unorganized sector. And how are we going to bring dignity, social security to these poor souls? And still it is not clear. But if we look into the constitutional mandate, we cannot compromise the basic socio-economic rights of the people along with the civil and political rights. So I would subscribe that now it is a time we need to greatly emphasize on the socio-economic rights of the people. And the last point is that now the earlier political regimes have introduced some kind of policies which substantiate the social security, such as Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme. Now, if you look at that particular scheme, I strongly feel that it is somehow compromised because of non-allotment of the funds for that particular program, which ensures at least 100 days of work to the people of this country in rural areas. Maybe I think we need to look at that particular point also. And finally, we will have to look at that, how are we going to address the problems of hunger and poverty and the growing inequalities in the midst of the COVID-19. So this is a very gloomy picture right now in the India's policy level, as well as judiciary's non-responsiveness towards enforcing the basic rights of the people. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much, sir. So I have just two more brief points to add to the first and the second question. The first point is about, so I have discussed wages and everything. So one thing is, while the restrictions straight away apply to all the private entities, closure, lockdown, social distancing and everything, so it cannot act private parties that the payment of wages order is not applicable to them. Srijit, are you there? His screen froze. Okay. Second thing is, a lot of time, I mean, this has been pointed out that a lot of businesses, or rather business houses who have given donations to PM Care Fund because CSR and everything, have actually not paid their own employees' salaries and wages. So this anachronistic situation which has emerged because of that is quite pitiable. Third thing is, how businesses have emerged as a winner in tragedy. So the trafficking in human misery has led to some becoming the richest and have really helped them to get a lot of money in the first place. So one thing that has also has happened all this while is that you have businesses who have made the most profitable gain. For example, Reliance. Reliance is now debt free officially as we speak, as per Mukesh Ambani. So you had a lot of money pouring in to the tune of 1.69 lakh crores during the middle of a pandemic. So to say that you have to rescue businesses hit from the pandemic, I think it is putting horse before, or rather cart before the horse. I mean, it is the humans, and rather it is exactly the people who have been hit hardest. And this argument that people have not worked, hence they cannot pay, and this work from home itself is very latest construct, in the sense that if you have the ability to work from home, you are in that one particular socio-economic strata which is really privileged. So the laborers who come next where I stay, they cannot work from home because they get paid day by day for physical work. So this linkage or this proximity of work from home culture and the inability to work is something, and hence inability to pay is something that has to be busted throughout, because the businesses have, and that is what Marx said, the capitalism is built on the hard labor, and it is by the exploitation that it is built. So and obviously he gave a very good call to have a revolution for that, and it has already been discussed. But all I'm saying, the the role of the court right now is to give relief and not to give it like the ball in their own court, because the court is not equal between the employer and the employees. So that is one. So moving on, I think Srijit got disconnected. Srijit, are you there?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
I mean, your video feed has been going and coming. Okay, so we will have to edit all this out. Uh, One thing is, I think Banerjee sir got disconnected now. Okay, so coming to the third question. Yes, sir. Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, yes, I can hear
Yeah,
you.
yeah. So the fact is that you while you had the government putting the restrictions were very egalitarian. They did not distinguish or discriminate. So what is the role of the court is one question. The role of the court is that it cannot obviously sit on policy or make policy, as some people have said, but it can definitely test the policy against constitutional principle. But that has happened in the high courts, especially of Gujarat, and the High Court of Gujarat has done really good work. You have the High Court of Karnataka, which has asked the government very hard pointed questions, pinpointed questions. You ask questions, they submit reply, then you cross question, and that is how accountability comes in. So the government has not been held accountable for its carte blanche orders. That is one. So before I finish with the payment of wages and the suspension laws. So Article 19 allows everyone to freely profess or choose their trade or freedom or profession, and also allows anyone to be anywhere. I mean, settle, live, move, do anything all across India. So your Article 19 is particularly violated through obviously this migration crisis, but at the same time, you only do not have Article 19 at work, you also have Article 21 at play here, because this disproportionately affects the worker who are already the most vulnerable, marginalized, and poor. So, yeah, I think the the order is very flawed and totally unreasonable to pass during this pandemic. Coming to the question of your on the question of your Arogya Setu. Okay, so it has already been discussed. The main criticism was that you really have no idea who made it. Secondly, you had something, I mean, whenever it comes, there is some secret pleasure people derive to actually harass others. And that was the case with the residential welfare associations, wherein you cannot enter the society unless you have the, Arogya Setu, or you cannot get through the pass unless you have Arogya Setu. Now, I mean, it was made compulsory for all the government employees, and employers had to ensure that all their employees had Arogya Setu. Why? So they say it is geolocation, geofencing, and everything. But I mean, we do not have any privacy law in the first place. Secondly, we do not have any, I mean, data protection bill. So we do not have any reason to actually just give away the most critical information out there. And obviously, an ethical hacker pointed out that, I mean, I can see through the architecture, I can tell who is infected where. And that made the government contact them, and they finally came up with the source code. And it will be surprised who made it. I mean, it was a bunch of people in the private and the public who made it. Now, the first thing is that you cannot have this. You do not have specific legislation which authorizes Arogya Setu. You do not have any anchoring legislation. For example, you had Aadhaar Act. Now, if you remember, it was also brought in as an executive. Then there was backlash from the civil society, lawyers, everyone who argued that this is surveillance. This is basically an architecture of surveillance. You're pushing through this architecture, and which was actually agreed upon by Justice Chandrachud. But herein you have no, let's say, clarity as to who will store the data, who will have the access to the data, so on and so forth. So there's no informed consent. I mean, it is a tick box, and that is that. Secondly, there is, I mean, okay. So whenever you have something like this, ordinances, you have to see the proportionality standard. Now, the standard of proportionality was and strict scrutiny was obviously discussed in Aadhaar case. Basically, proportionality, or rather, whether proportionality standard for right to privacy, as in the judgment of Puttaswamy, was that whether there is legality, that is whether it is requirement of a law with a legitimate purpose. So that is absent here. There is no law which requires it, is nothing more than because I said so, you have to do it. Secondly, suitability. Does the government action must be suitable for addressing the problem? That is, there must be a rational relationship between the means and the end. Again, because you Article 14, basically, you have to tell how the classification is done and what it means to achieve. So you have to tell why Arogya Setu is so important. And this statement is not sufficient because it will help us trace. But I mean, we have actually seen, and Internet Freedom Foundation has done a brilliant paper telling how flawed the whole concept is and how it is not working. Or for it to be workable, it has to be downloaded on at least 50 to 60% of mobile, and going by and knowing how mobile penetration is in India, that is never going to happen. So right now you have barely 10 to 12 crore people who have been mandated to download, and out of that, obviously more than 1/3 or 1/4 are government employees. Third, necessity. So is it really the least restrictive alternative which is there? I mean, can we do something lesser restrictive otherwise? And the fourth is proportionality stricto sensu. So there is, I mean, there has to be a balance between the rights which are infringed, that is your right to autonomy, agency, the ability to make choice whether or not I want to download or not. And that was not there with Aadhaar. Aadhaar was voluntary, except it was mandatory for living a life here. I mean, everything was supposed to be linked to Aadhaar. And obviously, Ritika Khera has done an excellent work on Aadhaar. So there's a whole Brookings paper which has showed that why such apps don't work. First is because contact tracing is effective where there exists large scale testing capacity and less spread. I mean, this is definitely not existent in India with 4 lakh people. Your testing is obviously has not caught up as to what WHO says. Secondly, there is a high risk of false positive and false negatives, uh, and this is really bad when the population size increases. You have to remember, I mean, if you're wrongly diagnosed to be coronavirus positive, the stigma is really bad. Your So that is one. Uh, and the way you're perceived around, and that has happened actually with one of my former law student. So that being said and done, the last thing is uh, complete. I mean, that is what I mentioned before. You, for this to work, you really have to see how much the smartphone penetration is there. I mean, it asks you everything. I mean, you have to have your Bluetooth location on. So I mean, the data collection practices of Arogya Setu fall short of the constitutional standard, and they have already been discussed. They have already been uh, dealt with. So again, there is no alternate to that as per the government, and there is also no transparency at all. So in conclusion, I mean, this is totally wrong. It has it has a lot of serious flaws, and this just goes on to show how government really is so hesitant to be held accountable. And that is why are actually utilizing NDMA, the National Disaster Management Act. Technically, it is not a disaster as per NDMA, because again, if you read the meaning of disaster there, it can be applied to specific areas and not whole country. So that is one. Secondly, with Arogya Setu, I mean, uh, so NDMA, I mean, basically, this is like, how to put it, like a Santa's bag. Your executive decrees of the government. You are putting absolutely anything and everything within there, and that is where the role of the court becomes crucial. That they are the one wherein the conversation will happen between the judges, the lawyers, and the civil society. That is the forum from where this happens. Otherwise, this is one-way communication. One fine morning, tomorrow onwards, we'll have no more banknotes. So, I mean, there's one more issue is how, with the rise of majoritarian government, you had backsliding of um, democracy, and how executive court is more executive than the executive, which means excessively deferential, and leaving it all to the government, that government knows best. I mean, that is one. And last thing is how courts have failed to apply the standards they themselves have espoused in a lot of cases, specifically the privacy case. So that being said and done, I think the Arogya Setu app, as well as the whole architecture of decrees that have been passed, is unconstitutional. With this, I would like to conclude and say thank you so much, Srijit and CNES, for organizing this, and thank you, Professor Banerjee, for sparing your time and coming aboard. Thank you so much.
In fact, Surender and Srijit, I just want to add a few points with regard to Arogya Setu is concerned. Okay. The first problem with Arogya Setu is that it doesn't have legality and legal basis. And the next one, Arogya Setu was used as a coercive mechanism, particularly as you mentioned, and it has been used by the central government, and all the central government employees have necessarily to download the app and use it. And now another condition which is kept by the government of India is that Arogya Setu is a mandatory for the travel. So which means if you see that, what you said, the entire architecture, which I will just supplement with that, it is being used as a kind of tool and mechanism for the purpose of surveillance and profiling of the people. This surveillance and profiling of the people has got its own legal connotations. If you look at that in India's Supreme Court jurisprudence, the entire jurisprudence shows that people have basic fundamental rights, particularly with regard to the surveillance is concerned. If I take the references of some cases like Ravi Kumar versus State of Bombay and Sunil Batra's case, and all these cases clearly says that people have an integrity. And now by penetrating this technology, by invasion into the privacy of the people, and you are trying to profile them, that as obviously what you said, that it's illegal and it's constitutionally not sound. So the whole episode of the Arogya Setu is now has been used by the central government in order to invoke a kind of profiling architecture for the purpose of using for the longer vested interest purposes. Like that how if you look at that in Cambridge Analytica, how they have been profiling the people and using this particular mechanism. Now in the discipline of the law and technology, if you look at the Arogya Setu and its legality, it obviously violates all the basic fundamental rights of the people. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Srijit.
Thank you, Surendra, for wonderful opportunity for talking and discussing.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you, Srijit.
Thank you so much, sir. Yeah, I'd like to apologize for all the network issues I had throughout the
no
session,
worries.
but it was very enlightening to hear to all of you.
It's a wonderful efforts by your center.
Yes, lovely. Thank you so much,
sir. I'll send you a series of mails where we have documented all the previous work, and especially the writings, the articles, even some publications which we have, international publications also which we have made. So I'll send you all the articles and all. So that
lovely.
all right, sir.
Lovely. Thank you so much.